They put me in a nursing home on my 68th birthday. Not after a long illness. Not because I couldn't walk or talk or feed myself. No, they did it because it was convenient. If you're here, I'm glad. I need someone to hear this all the way through, because for a long time, no one listened to me at all. So let me take you back. Back to the day everything still felt mostly normal, when I still believed my daughter loved me, when I still believed my son-in-law wanted to help, when I still believed that getting older didn't automatically make you disposable. Back when I didn't yet know that signing one stack of papers, just one, would give them everything they needed to push me out of my own life like I was unwanted clutter. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me slow down. Let me breathe. The way I had to breathe on that morning, sitting on the edge of the bed in the little room they assigned me. I didn't even realize yet that it would become my prison. It was a bright morning. I remember that. Sun cutting through the blinds, the kind of gentle golden light people like to describe in greeting cards. Warm, soft, forgiving. I was sitting on a mattress that wasn't mine, in a room decorated in a style I had never chosen. My suitcase sat at the foot of the bed, half unzipped, slumped like it had given up. The air smelled like disinfectant and vanilla-scented air freshener, a combination I've never understood. Across from me was a dresser someone else had used before me. It had scratches in the shape of keys or fingernails, I couldn't tell which. On the wall, a laminated poster warned residents to ask for help before you fall. A nurse had just left the room after telling me to settle in. She used the voice people reserve for confused children. She never once made eye contact. I remember thinking, I don't belong here. Not yet. Not like this. And I didn't. That was the truth no one cared to say out loud. But the saddest part, the part that still stings, I hadn't seen it coming. I had trusted the very people who put me there. People I raised. People I cooked for, cried with, prayed for. People whose birthdays I never once forgot, even when money was tight. People I would have died for. I didn't know what they were planning until it was too late. I didn't know that the documents they asked me to sign weren't temporary support forms, as they called them. I didn't know that those signatures would hand over my house, my savings, my autonomy, my entire life. I didn't know until the doors of that place clicked shut behind me, and the sound echoed like the last page of a book snapping closed. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about awakening, about reclaiming power even when the world thinks you've run out of time. You see, the moment they put me there, something in me hardened, not out of anger, not at first, but out of instinct. A quiet voice deep inside whispered, "Pay attention. Remember everything. Nothing is what you think it is." And so I did. I noticed every unnatural pause in my daughter's voice, every overly sweet apology from my son-in-law, every time they said, "It's for your own good," with those tight-lipped smiles that never reached their eyes. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before things fell apart, before the betrayal, there was life. Real life. Warm, imperfect, human. And you can't understand what they took from me unless I take you there first. So let me back up to last spring. The lilacs were blooming early, my garden was waking up, and I was still walking 2 miles every morning. Still cooking my own meals, still paying my own bills, still clipping coupons even though I didn't need to anymore. Still believing my daughter visited because she loved spending time with me, not because she was scouting the house like an investor walking through a property she already planned to sell. Looking back, the red flags were there. Sometimes obvious, sometimes subtle. A sideways glance, a comment too quick to dismiss, a half sentence that didn't sit right. But I didn't know what I was seeing, not then. When it's your own child, you don't see danger. You see someone you'd forgive before they even finish explaining what they did wrong. And that's exactly the blind spot they counted on. Let me take you to the beginning. Let me tell you about the morning my daughter, Ava, first mentioned future planning. Let me tell you how harmless it sounded, how innocent she made it seem, how stupid I felt later for not hearing the hunger in her voice, the kind that has nothing to do with food. It started in the kitchen. My kitchen. A place I had painted twice with my own hands. A place filled with the hum of the old refrigerator I refused to replace because it had character. Ava stood by the window, sipping coffee I brewed too strong for her taste. She pretended to admire the garden, but her fingers tapped the cup the whole time. Tap, 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 like she was rehearsing a speech in her head. I think we should talk about planning, she finally said. I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel and smiling because I thought she meant plans for my birthday, or maybe a family trip. I didn't know she meant my life, or the end of it, as far as control was concerned. Those early days, the subtle comments, the pointed questions, the false concern, they make sense now. But back then, they felt small, dismissible, like little breezes that eventually turn into storms. You don't see the storm coming when the sky is still blue. You don't believe your own daughter would hand you a pen with one hand and take your entire world with the other. But that is exactly what happened. And the worst part, I signed. I signed because I trusted them. I signed because I thought families protect each other. I signed because I believed love was enough. I didn't know they had already decided what was best for me. I didn't know they had already talked to lawyers behind my back. I didn't know they were counting down the days until my birthday, not to celebrate me, but to remove me. I didn't know, but I would learn. Oh, I would learn everything. And when I did, I would make sure they understood that even at 68, even after betrayal, even after being discarded like an old shoe, I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot, because this is not a story about a helpless old woman. This is a story about the moment she realized she wasn't helpless at all. And that realization, that's where everything truly begins. And it all started with one small lie. A lie so gentle I didn't even feel its weight until it crushed me. Before everything cracked open, my life was quiet in a way that felt earned. Not glamorous, not extraordinary, just steady. There's a type of peace that only comes with age, when you've lived through enough storms to appreciate every small moment that isn't one. I was in that stage of life, a stage where mornings were slow, the coffee was strong, and the house creaked in familiar ways that felt like old friends greeting me. My house, wasn't large, but it never needed to be. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen I'd painted yellow, a living room filled with mismatched furniture collected over decades. The sofa sagged toward the middle, but it held memories of my husband falling asleep during movies, of my daughter building forts with sheets and cushions, of Christmas mornings when wrapping paper covered every inch of the floor. The walls were thin enough that on quiet nights I could hear the wind pushing against them, almost like the house was breathing with me. For 35 years, it had been my anchor. I woke early every day, partly out of habit, partly because the sunrise slipping through my curtains felt like a gentle invitation. I'd shuffle into the kitchen, fill the kettle, and stand there leaning on the counter while it boiled. That tiny pause between waking up and starting the day always grounded me. After breakfast, I'd step outside to check on the garden. Age had made me move slower, sure, but my knees weren't as bad as people assumed, and tending the flowers kept me agile. Lilacs along the fence, roses near the porch, a patch of herbs in the back, basil, rosemary, thyme. I like brushing my hands across the rosemary just to smell it. It always reminded me of Sunday dinners when my husband would roast potatoes until the whole house smelled warm and safe. Life wasn't perfect. Of course not. Being widowed shifts something in you, like the world suddenly tilts and you spend years trying to relearn your balance. But I had found my rhythm again. My husband had been gone 6 years, and although I never stopped missing him, the grief had softened into something I could carry without drowning under it. Ava visited me often, which I appreciated more than I admitted. She'd always been busy. She came into the world impatient, always moving, always planning, but after her father died, a gentleness bloomed in her. She called me twice a week, sometimes more. She'd drop by after work, usually bringing something she said she saw and thought of me, a new brand of tea, a scarf, a small plant she insisted would thrive in the kitchen window. Those visits were warm. We'd sit at the table drinking coffee too late in the day, talking about her work or the neighbors or the new recipes she was trying. Sometimes she'd lean into me the way she did as a child, head on my shoulder, and I'd feel that fierce, maternal swell of love that never fades, no matter how old your child becomes. Her husband, Mark, came along sometimes too. I knew people liked to joke about disliking their in-laws, but honestly, I'd always tried to make space for him. He was quiet, analytical, always looking at things like he was trying to solve them. Sometimes he'd watch me walk across the room, and I'd feel like he was assessing me the way a mechanic listens to an engine. Not unkindly, just clinically. Still, he was good to Ava, and that was enough. At least, that's what I believed then. I didn't need much from anyone. I paid my own bills. I handled the grocery shopping, even if I took a little longer reading labels. I drove locally, never the freeway, but I liked being able to take myself to the store or the library or down to the lake on warm afternoons. I liked my independence. It was important to me, especially after losing my husband. Without it, I would have felt like half a person. It's strange, looking back now, how normal everything seemed. How untouched by danger my life felt. Betrayal never announces itself early. It slips in quietly, wearing the clothes of routine. One week, Ava asked me what bills cost these days. "What's the electric running?" she asked casually, stirring sugar into her tea. I didn't think much of it. She was at the age where budgeting was becoming real. Mortgage, car payments, dreams of someday having a child. So I told her, just numbers, just facts. Another time she asked if I'd thought about long-term care for someday. I laughed and said, "Someday is not today," and she laughed too, but hers had a strain in it I didn't recognize then. And then there were the papers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This part of the story, the calm before anything cracked, was filled with ordinary days. Every Tuesday, I met a group of women my age for breakfast at a small cafe run by a couple who treated us like favorite aunts. We shared stories, compared medications, complained about politics, celebrated grandchildren. It made me feel connected. Every Thursday, I volunteered at the small community center near the park. I helped sort donated clothes, chatted with the staff, folded tiny baby shirts, and wondered about the families who'd need them. It felt meaningful, like I still had something to give. And Saturdays, I reserved those for myself. I'd make a full breakfast, wash the sheets, open all the windows no matter the weather. A ritual, a quiet one. And in those hours, I felt entirely myself. Ava liked to drop in after her errands on Saturdays. She'd sit cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through her phone between conversations. Sometimes she'd ask if I needed help with anything, yard work, cleaning gutters, changing light bulbs. I appreciated it, even if it stung a little to be reminded that some tasks were harder than before. But I wasn't frail. That's the truth I wish I could show you. I wasn't fragile. I wasn't confused. I wasn't slipping. I was simply aging. And aging is not a crime. Still, the tone of conversations began shifting in small ways, almost too small to notice. One afternoon, Ava frowned at my shoes. "You should get better support," she said. "You don't want to fall." Another time, she lingered a little too long watching me descend the porch steps. "You're getting slower, Mom." Not unkind, not accusatory, just observing. Or so I thought. Looking back, I can see the pattern. Comments that planted ideas. Statements spoken with a softness designed not to alarm me. I didn't connect them at the time. That's the thing about hindsight. It sharpens everything. Makes the smallest detail glow like a warning sign you didn't know you should look for. At the time, I let the comments drift past me like leaves in a breeze. I smiled. I brushed them off. I assumed she was just being careful because she loved me. I didn't know she was collecting evidence. But before the unraveling came a moment so painfully ordinary that it almost feels cruel. A memory of a day I still hold close because it was simple and warm and undisturbed by suspicion. It was early June. The lilacs were fading, but the roses were finally blooming, deep red ones that had taken 2 years to truly settle in. I'd baked a peach cobbler that morning and set it on the table to cool, the whole house filled with that sweet, buttery smell that always makes me feel like summer has arrived. Ava and Mark came by unexpectedly. They had that energy people carry when they've just come from running errands, shoes scuffed with dust, hair slightly windblown, cheeks touched by the sun. Mark complimented the smell of the cobbler. Ava kissed my cheek, told me I looked cute, which made me laugh. We sat at the table eating cobbler still a little too warm, sharing ordinary conversation. It was the kind of afternoon that feels like home. But somewhere in that conversation, a shift happened, so subtle I didn't feel it then. Mark asked, casually, "Have you thought about downsizing? Smaller places are easier to manage." I remember the way Ava's fork paused, just for half a second. A tiny freeze, barely noticeable. But her eyes flicked toward him in a quick, sharp glance, one that said far more than the question itself. Then she smiled. Too quickly. "Yeah, Mom," she said lightly. "Just curious what your thoughts are." I brushed it off. I said, "This house fits me fine," and laughed to soften the rejection. But that moment, that tiny pause in her fork, that too-fast smile, that glance between them, it lodged somewhere in me. Not enough to scare me. Not enough to make me suspicious. Just enough to make me feel something shift in the air, like a picture frame knocked slightly crooked. I didn't analyze it. I didn't dwell on it. But the seed was planted, quietly, deeply, and without my consent. And later that night, lying in bed listening to the soft whir of the ceiling fan, I replayed it without meaning to. That glance, what was that? I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself they were just being curious about my future. But something lingered, something I couldn't shake. A small, uninvited whisper inside me said, "Pay attention." And I wish, God, I wish I had listened sooner. Because that tiny moment at my kitchen table, that subtle, delicate, almost invisible pause, it was the first sign, the first tremor before the earthquake. And it was only the beginning. The moment things truly began to shift didn't come with a bang. It didn't come with shouting or accusations or anything that would have warned me. It came quietly, so quietly that if I hadn't replayed it in my mind 100 times since, I might have forgotten it entirely. It began with a phone call. It was a Wednesday morning, the kind where nothing in particular happens. I'd just finished watering the back garden and was sitting at the table with a bowl of oatmeal cooling in front of me. The phone rang, and I answered without checking the caller ID, expecting it to be one of those automated messages about car warranties. But it was Ava. Her voice was too cheerful. Not unpleasant, not suspicious on its own, just brighter than usual. Forced at the edges. "Mom, I was thinking, could I come by later? There's something I want to talk to you about." I remember tilting my head, puzzled, because Ava wasn't the type to preface things like that. She usually just said whatever she needed to say. I asked what it was. She laughed, a small, nervous sound, and said, "Nothing dramatic. Just, life planning stuff." That phrase again. Life planning. I agreed, of course. She was my daughter. When your child asks to see you, you don't think twice. You open the door before they knock. She arrived around 4 in the afternoon. I was sweeping the porch when her car pulled in. She stepped out with that same forced brightness she'd had on the phone, shoulders squared, smile ready, like she was preparing for a job interview rather than visiting her mother. She hugged me tightly, longer than usual. Inside, she wandered the living room as if seeing it for the first time. Her fingers skimmed the edge of the bookshelf, the mantel, the picture frames. "You've kept everything so nice," she said. It sounded like a compliment, but something in me tightened at the way she said it. We sat at the kitchen table, and she folded her hands. Her wedding ring caught the light, flashing in a way that drew my eye. It felt symbolic somehow, like a small reminder of the life she'd built apart from me. "Mom," she began, "you know I love you, right?" I laughed. "Of course. And you know I only want what's best for you." That was the first moment I felt an internal shift. A faint, low uneasiness, like a cold fingertip pressing lightly against the base of my spine. I told her I knew that. At the time, I believed it. She took a breath. "I've been doing research about aging," she said. "I just want to make sure everything is set up properly as you get older. We never talked about things like power of attorney or medical directives." I blinked at her, surprised. It wasn't that the ideas were unreasonable. Plenty of people my age made those kinds of arrangements. It was just unexpected, sudden. I asked her why she was thinking about it now. She hesitated, just a small beat. Then she said, "It's just good to be prepared. And I've noticed you seem tired lately." Tired? The word hit me strangely. I wasn't tired. Not beyond the usual aches and slowness that come with age. But she said it so gently, so sympathetically, that I almost questioned myself. "Mom, you don't have to handle everything alone anymore. Let us help." Let us, meaning her and Mark. That cold fingertip pressed a little harder. I told her I appreciated her concern, but I was managing fine. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It had the shape of a smile, the movement of one, but none of the warmth. She didn't push further that day. She let the conversation drift into safer topics. We watered the plants together. She helped me bring in a heavy bag of soil. Everything seemed normal by the time she left, but something in the air had changed. Like a thread had been plucked, vibrating faintly without breaking. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. Her words echoed in the dark. "You seem tired lately. I want what's best for you." Life planning. 3 phrases. Soft, harmless on the surface, but they tangled together in a way that made sleep difficult. Still, I tried to brush it off. Ava had always been proactive. Maybe she'd simply read an article online and wanted to talk about it. People worry. Daughters worry. But unease isn't something you can reason with. It sits in your stomach and waits. A few days later, another small moment fed that unease. Mark stopped by alone. That was unusual. He never came without Ava unless he needed to fix something, and nothing needed fixing. He stood on my porch, hands in his pockets, posture stiff. He looked like a man who'd rehearsed what he was about to say and still wasn't sure it would land. "Hi, Mom," he said. He'd called me that since the wedding. It used to feel sweet. That day it felt off-key. I invited him in. He declined coffee, which was even stranger. He always accepted coffee. Then he asked if he could take a look at the basement. The basement? No one asked to look at a basement unless something was wrong. I asked why. He said he wanted to check for mold, that older homes often had hidden issues, and he just wanted to make sure it was safe. Safe. Another word that scraped against something inside me. I told him he was welcome to check, and I followed him down the stairs. He examined the walls, the support beams, the water heater. He tapped surfaces with the knuckle of his finger, humming thoughtfully. After a few minutes, he turned to me and said, "You really shouldn't be going up and down these stairs. They are steep." I answered honestly, "I only come down here to change the filter or grab something from storage." He frowned, a small, disappointed frown, like he'd been hoping I'd say something else, something that would prove a point. He left soon after. No explanation, no casual conversation, just a quick, almost businesslike exit. Another thread plucked, another hum of discomfort. But it was what happened later that night that truly caught my attention. Ava called me. Not unusual, but her voice was soft and serious. "Mom," she said, "did Mark come by today?" I said yes, and he looked at the basement. Her tone tightened slightly, like she was trying to stay calm. I said yes again. There was a long pause. Too long. I could hear her breathing. "Mom, please don't worry. We're just thinking about things. About the future." That word again. Future. I asked her what things. She answered with something vague about safety, responsibility, and wanting to be proactive. But she said it too quickly, too smoothly, like she'd practiced the line. When we hung up, the unease bloomed into something heavier. Not fear yet, not suspicion, just a nagging discomfort that made my skin feel slightly too tight. I tried to distract myself by cleaning the kitchen, folding laundry, watering the plants. But the thoughts kept circling. Why did Mark come alone? Why did he look so closely at everything? Why did Ava sound scared? Not scared for me, scared of something else. I didn't have answers, only a growing sense that something was forming just out of sight. And then came the envelope. A plain white envelope slipped through my mail slot one morning, addressed to me with no return address. Inside was a brochure from a local elder services organization. The brochure wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the sticky note attached to it. The handwriting was Ava's. Thought this might be useful. Love you. Useful. I skimmed the brochure. It was about estate planning, guardianship, long-term care options, assisted living resources. My heart thudded once, painfully. Useful. I tried to calm myself. Maybe she was just being thorough. She always had been organized to the point of excess. Maybe she'd sent it out of genuine concern. But the timing, the secrecy, the sudden focus on my health, my safety, my house, the envelope with no return address. It all added up to something that made my breath shorten. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. When it's your child, you give them every possible benefit of the doubt. You cling to the belief that love protects you from being wronged. But there was one last moment, small, barely noticeable, that finally locked the unease into place. I found Ava in the living room one afternoon, staring at a framed picture of me and her father from decades ago. She didn't hear me come in. Her face was strained, sad, yes, but something else too. Something calculating, something heavy. She whispered, barely audible, "I just want to make sure this goes the right way." Then she saw me. She startled. Her smile snapped on like a light switch. "Didn't hear you come in, Mom." I asked her what she meant. She laughed it off, said she was talking about work, a project, something insignificant. But her eyes looked guilty. And that was the first time, the very first time, a sharp flicker of fear cut through me. A whisper inside said, "This isn't nothing. This is the beginning." And it was, because what came next didn't just confirm my unease. It shattered everything I thought I knew. The moment everything snapped into focus didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. Small discoveries layered on top of each other until the truth became too heavy to ignore. It began with a voicemail. I wasn't expecting one. I hardly ever checked them. Usually they were spam calls pretending to be the electric company. But that afternoon, as I was wiping down the counters, I saw the blinking notification on my phone and pressed play without thinking. A woman's voice spoke briskly, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Diane from Crestwood Legal Services. We're following up on the documents regarding guardianship and property transfer. We need confirmation from the family before we proceed. Please return our call." Guardianship, property transfer, proceed. My heart didn't just sink, it bottomed out entirely. I replayed the message twice, hands trembling, breath catching in my throat. Then I deleted it, not out of fear but out of instinct. Something in me whispered, "Don't let them know you heard this yet." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Ava first mentioned planning, and stared at the grain of the wood until the lines blurred. Guardianship. They were trying to make decisions for me. Legal decisions, binding ones, and property transfer. My home. Something hot and sharp rose in my chest. Fear, betrayal, disbelief, all tangled so tightly I couldn't separate them. I needed answers. Real ones. Not the sugar-coated reassurances Ava had been feeding me. But going to her directly didn't feel safe. Not yet. I needed to see things with my own eyes, not through polished explanations. The following morning, I drove to the bank. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe the voicemail was a mistake. But anyone who's ever had a gut feeling knows that logic can't drown it. The banker, a man named Colin I'd spoken to many times, greeted me with his usual polite nod. I asked him if I could review my accounts, all of them. He hesitated. A small pause, barely noticeable, but enough to make my stomach clench. "Of course," he said. "Let me pull them up." As he typed, I watched his expression change. Not dramatically, just a slight tightening around the mouth, a softness in his tone that wasn't there before. "Mrs. Reynolds, I see there were some updates recently." My fingers curled against the counter. "Updates?" "Yes. Your daughter was added as a cosigner last month." Last month. Around the same time she started asking about bills. Around the same time Mark inspected the basement. Around the same time those conversations about safety began. I asked who authorized it. He frowned, confused. You did. Your signature is on file. I stared at him. At first, I thought he must be mistaken. But then he rotated the monitor slightly so I could see. There it was. My signature. Except it wasn't. Not exactly. It was close enough to pass at a glance, but wrong in the curves, the pressure, the slant. I'd signed my name thousands of times. I knew its shape the way you know your own reflection. A chill spread through me. I swallowed hard and asked him to print the documents. He did. When I held the papers in my hands, the room seemed to tilt. A faint buzzing filled my ears. My signature, not my signature, was scribbled across 3 different forms. Ava's name beside mine. Mark's signature as a witness. It felt like my heart cracked down the center. I thanked the banker with a calmness I didn't feel, tucked the papers into my purse, and walked out into the sunlight like someone stepping into a world they no longer recognized. The A felt wrong. Too bright. Too sharp. I sat in my car and forced myself to breathe through the shaking. I'd always thought betrayal would be loud. Arguments, slammed doors, broken promises shouted in anger. But this was quiet, secretive, deliberate. And it wasn't the last discovery I made that week. 2 days later, I drove to the small law office where my husband and I had our wills drafted years ago. The attorney who had helped us had retired, but his partner, a soft-spoken woman named Clara, agreed to meet with me. She looked over my file, flipping carefully through the documents. I see there were inquiries about updating your will, she said. Your daughter contacted us last month. I sat very still. She didn't tell me. Clara hesitated. She gave the impression that you were considering transferring some of your assets early, something about simplifying things. Simplifying? My hands tightened around my purse. I didn't authorize anything, I said quietly. Clara nodded sympathetically. Nothing has been changed yet. But there was a draft. A draft? She pulled a packet from the file and slid it toward me. I opened it with numb fingers. The draft stated that Ava would have full control of my estate should anything impair my ability to make independent decisions. A clause I never agreed to. A clause that was disturbingly vague. It went further. The house, my home, would be transferred into a family trust. A trust controlled by Ava. My throat tightened until it felt impossible to swallow. I asked Clara if these kinds of requests were common. She hesitated, just long enough to send another tremor through me. Sometimes, she said gently, family members misunderstand what their elders want. Other times, people attempt to take control before it's needed. Before it's needed. My pulse pounded in my ears. On the drive home, memories flooded me in hard, fast waves. Ava pausing too long when Mark asked about downsizing. Mark studying the basement like he was appraising it. Her bright, artificial smile. Her sudden fixation on my well-being. The envelope with no return address. The brochure. The hushed whisper I overheard. I just want to make sure this goes the right way. I felt sick. But the final blow came that evening. I was in the living room, sorting mail, when I heard voices outside. Ava and Mark. They hadn't knocked yet. They were standing on the porch talking. And they weren't whispering. They were arguing. Quietly, but intensely. Mark said, "You need to push her." The lawyer said the sooner we get this signed, the cleaner it'll be. My breath froze. Ava hissed back, "I know, but she's not ready yet. She'll question it if we do it too fast." My hands began to shake. "She's getting older," Mark said. "We have to do this while she's still cooperative." Cooperative. Like I was a piece of machinery. Ava exhaled shakily. "I just want to make sure we do it right. If she panics, everything falls apart." I didn't hear the rest. A roaring filled my ears, drowning out their voices. Not anger. Not yet. Something worse. Realization. They weren't planning for my future. They were planning to control it. They weren't helping me. They were preparing to take everything. And I had loved them too much to see it. The front door suddenly opened, and Ava stepped in with a bright smile that looked like it was made of glass. "Hi, Mom." But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the daughter I thought I knew. She paused, her smile flickering. Is everything okay? In that moment, her face blurred with memories. The little girl who used to crawl into my lap, the teenager who stayed up late talking with me, the woman I stood beside on her wedding day. And now, the person who was trying to take my life out from under me. I forced myself to breathe, to speak, to act normal. Because the truth was suddenly clear. If I showed even a hint that I knew what they were doing, they would move faster. And I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to understand the full scope. I needed to see the edges of the trap before I could escape it. So I swallowed my heartbreak and smiled back at her. But that night, when they left, I locked the door and slid down to the floor, the papers from the bank and lawyers spread around me like broken pieces of my world. I cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just soft, exhausted tears that soaked into my hands. I cried because I finally understood the truth. They weren't waiting for me to need help. They were creating the narrative that I did. They were gathering evidence. They were preparing the paperwork. They were choreographing my decline before it even happened. Every kind gesture had been a calculation. Every worried tone a rehearsal. Every small comment about my tiredness, my slowness, my safety. Seeds they were planting. Seeds meant to grow into a justification. And sitting there on the floor, surrounded by documents I'd never signed, I reached the lowest point of my life. Because the people I loved most were building a future that didn't include me. A future where I had no voice, no home, no freedom, just control, theirs, over everything that was mine. And for the first time since my husband died, I felt truly alone. But even in that loneliness, one thought flickered faintly. If they think I'm too old to fight back, they are wrong. I didn't sleep the night I learned the truth. Not a single minute. I sat at the kitchen table with the unsigned papers spread around me, the clock ticking loudly in the quiet house. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the walls cooling, my own breath coming shallow and uneven. I wasn't crying anymore. The tears had burned themselves out. What remained was something colder, steadier, resolve. It surprised me, honestly. I thought betrayal at this level would shatter me completely. But instead, something inside me clicked into place with unsettling clarity. They thought they could take my life from me. They thought they could take my home, my autonomy, my freedom. They thought age made me weak. They were wrong. And the more I sat there, the more a quiet, deliberate determination began to take root. I wasn't going to confront them in a fit of emotion. I wasn't going to scream or plead or ask why. I was going to watch and plan and wait. If they believed I was incapable, if they needed that narrative to justify what they were doing, then I would use their assumptions like a cloak. After all, there's power in being underestimated. But first, I had to protect myself. Properly, legally, silently. The next morning, I drove to a coffee shop 2 towns over, not the one near my house, not the one where anyone might recognize me. I sat in the far corner booth and used their Wi-Fi to search for elder law attorneys. Not estate planners, not general practitioners. I needed someone who had seen situations like mine. Someone who knew the signs. Someone who could move quietly. I found a firm 40 minutes away run by a woman named Marisol Ortega. Her reviews were filled with words like patient, strategic, fierce. Exactly what I needed. I called. She answered. Her voice was calm, steady, not overly sympathetic, just grounded. When I explained the situation, not everything, just enough, she paused. Mrs. Reynolds, she said gently, I want you to come in. Today, if possible. And don't bring anyone with you. I felt my heart steady. I'll be there. The drive to her office was quiet. The world felt strange, like everything was too bright, too sharp, as if betrayal had peeled away a layer of innocence I didn't know I still had. Marisol's office was small but warm, filled with books and soft lighting. She offered me tea, which I accepted even though my hands still felt unsteady. I laid the forged bank forms and the will draft on her desk. She read silently, slowly. Her eyes moved with a sharpness that reminded me of someone sorting puzzle pieces. When she finished, she looked up. You're right to be concerned. Her tone was calm but serious. This is the beginning of a guardianship attempt. They're gathering documentation to argue that you lack capacity. Once that happens, they can take control of your assets. My chest tightened. Can they succeed? She studied me for a moment. Do you feel incapable? No. Do you manage your own home? Cook, drive, pay bills? Yes. Do you understand what's happening to you? A pause, a deep breath. Yes. Her expression softened, but not with pity, with respect. Then we can fight this. We can stop it before it starts. But you need to be proactive. That word again, proactive. But this time, it was mine. I leaned forward. What do I need to do? She outlined the plan with a precision that made something inside me unclench. First, we would formally and legally revoke all co-signer status, access, and powers that had been added without my authorization. She would draft letters and arrange for them to be delivered directly, bypassing Ava entirely. Second, we would create updated legal documents, ones that reflected my wishes, not anyone else's. A new will, new power of attorney documents that named a neutral professional, not family. Third, we would document everything, every function I performed independently, every conversation I recalled, every suspicious action taken by Ava and Mark. She said it would create a paper trail proving I was competent and aware. Fourth, I would not, under any circumstances, confront them yet. People become unpredictable when they feel their control slipping, she warned. Let them believe their plan is working. That gives you the power. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to safety. She handed me a notebook. Write everything down, she said. Dates, times, observations. This is your shield. I clutched it like a lifeline. Before I left, she placed a hand gently on mine. You're stronger than you realize. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. But inside, I felt something steady forming, like a beam of steel rising through the rubble. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. When I arrived home, I moved deliberately, quietly. I hid the notebook in a drawer beneath old linens, somewhere no one would casually look. I placed the forged documents inside my sewing box. I checked the locks, not because I feared intruders, but because I needed to feel control over something. That evening, Ava called. Her voice was sweet, almost childlike. Mom, can we come by tomorrow? We want to talk about a couple things. My breath steadied. I could hear the shape of their plan now, the gentle pressure, the steady push, the illusion of concern. Of course, I said calmly. Come anytime. The moment I hung up, I realized something important. I wasn't scared of them anymore. Oh, I was hurt. Deeply, achingly. But fear requires power, and they no longer had the kind they thought they had. They believed I was in the dark. They believed I was passive. They believed they were controlling the pace. But the truth was shifting. Quietly, subtly, I moved through the house that night with a sense of purpose. I double-checked my paperwork. I took photos of important documents with my phone, insurance papers, property deeds, identification. Sending copies to a secure folder Marisol helped me set up. I went through the drawers where Ava sometimes helped me organize, looking for anything that seemed out of place. In one binder, I found pamphlets for assisted living facilities, ones I had never requested. In another drawer, I found a checklist titled Signs of Cognitive Decline, certain items marked. My throat tightened. They were preparing a case. But preparation works both ways. At one point, I stood at the window, looking out at the streetlights. I pressed my palm against the cool glass and felt a strange calm wash over me. I wasn't angry at that moment. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was reclaiming myself, my identity, my competence, my dignity, not loudly, not with drama, just with deliberate, quiet decisions. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, not out of anxiety, but out of clarity. I brewed coffee and sat at the table, listening to the birds waking up. I felt tired. Yes, but it was the kind of tired that comes after finally making a choice you've avoided for too long. Ava and Mark arrived mid-morning. I opened the door with a soft smile, the one they expected, the one that didn't reveal anything. They stepped inside, exchanging glances that made my skin crawl. But I stayed calm. They sat with me in the living room, their posture too stiff, their smiles too controlled. Ava spoke first. "Mom, we've been thinking we should get some paperwork in order, just to be safe." I nodded gently. "I understand." Her eyes lit up slightly. Confirmation, she thought. Compliance. Mark added, "We can bring the forms next time. It'll be easier for everyone." I folded my hands. "Whatever you think is best." Inside, though, a quiet, cold fire burned. Let them bring whatever they wanted. Let them present their rehearsed consign. Let them believe I was yielding. Because the truth was simple. Their plan was already failing. They just didn't know it yet. After they left, their voices fading down the walkway, I sat very still and let the silence settle around me. This was no longer a story about a woman being pushed aside. This was a story about a woman reclaiming control. Not through confrontation, not through rage, but through preparation, knowledge, resolve. The storm was building. But for the first time, I wasn't standing unprotected in its path. I was bracing myself. I was ready. And beneath all of that, beneath the pain, the betrayal, the deliberate calm, something else surfaced. A quiet, growing thought. When the time comes, they won't see me coming. They came with the papers on a Sunday. Of course they did. Sundays felt innocent, quiet, slow, familiar. The kind of day you lower your guard without thinking. A day meant for family, not betrayal. But betrayal doesn't care about calendars. And they were ready. What they didn't know was that so was I. I had spent every day since meeting with Marisol preparing for this moment. Every conversation, every gesture, every question from them. I logged it, noted it, replayed it. I let them think I was yielding. I let them think I was slipping. I let them think I was exactly what they wanted me to be. Cooperative. It was the perfect disguise. When they pulled into the driveway, their faces were bright, rehearsed. Ava carried a thick folder tucked under her arm. Mark walked a little ahead of her, shoulders squared like a man about to finalize a deal. I opened the door before they knocked. "Come in," I said warmly. They stepped into my living room. I could feel the tension radiating off them, nervous excitement, quiet triumph. They had no idea the walls had already shifted around them. Ava sat beside me on the couch. Mark stood behind her like a guard. "Mom," she said gently, "we brought some things that need signatures. Just basic stuff. Nothing to stress about." My heartbeat slowed. Calm, steady, controlled. "Of course," I said. She opened the folder. And there it was, a stack of documents thick enough to reshape an entire life. My life. Healthcare directives, giving them full authority. Durable power of attorney, making Ava my legal voice. Property transfer agreements, moving my home into their trust. Everything. Everything they needed to take control. She slid the first page toward me. And behind her voice, behind the soft tone, behind the smile. "Faye, not mine. His. Mom, are you ready?" I nodded. Mark placed a pen beside my hand. For a moment, none of us moved. Then I picked up the pen. Ava exhaled, relieved. I looked down at the signature line. My hand didn't shake. Not even slightly. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times. My calm was surgical. I uncapped the pen, pressed it to the paper, and then I stopped. I lifted my head and looked directly at Ava. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "before I sign anything, I want to understand what I'm signing." Her smile froze. She tried to recover. "Of course, Mom. It's all very simple." I nodded. "So explain it." Her eyes darted to Mark. He stepped forward like he'd been waiting for his cue. "It's just to make things easier," he said. "You know, as things progress." Progress. A single word, sharp as glass. "Things." I asked quietly, "What things?" He hesitated. Only half a second. But hesitation is enough to expose truth. Ava jumped in. Mom, you've been tired. Forgetful sometimes. Forgetful. I let the word settle. Slowly, I placed the pen on the coffee table. Ava, I said, what exactly have I forgotten? She blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. Mark stepped closer. Look, we don't have to make this dramatic. But I cut him off with a raised hand. No, I said. We don't. And then, in one deliberate motion, I stood up. Not slowly, not shakily, not like the frail version of me they'd been constructing. I rose with purpose. Their eyes widened. Good. Before we continue, I said calmly, I want you both to know something. Silence filled the room. Heavy, electric. I met with an attorney. The words landed like a stone thrown into still water. Ava's face drained of color. Mark's jaw clenched so tightly I saw the muscle twitch. I continued. She showed me the documents filed at the bank with a signature that wasn't mine. Ava's hand flew to her mouth. Mark stiffened. I saw the draft of the will you tried to change behind my back. Ava shook her head. Mom, wait. I didn't let her speak. And I heard you on the porch. Both of you, planning how to convince me. Mark took a step toward me. A misunderstanding. No, my voice was sharper than I expected. No misunderstanding. Silence again. Thick. Exposed. Breaking them apart from the inside. I know exactly what you've been doing, I said. And I need you to hear me clearly. I stepped closer. I am not done. They both flinched. Good. I wasn't finished. I revoked everything, I said. Every access point. Every authorization. Every loophole you thought you had. Ava's inhale was audible. My lawyer filed protections with the court. I continued. Real ones. Ones you can't sneak around. Mark's composure cracked. His face twisted into something angry. Ugly. You don't understand the legal process. Oh, I understand perfectly. My voice cut him cleanly in half. We're done playing confused, mother. That role doesn't suit me. Ava began to cry. Soft, shaking tears she tried to hide behind her hands. Mom, we were trying to help you. No, I said softly. You were trying to take from me. The truth hung in the air between us, undeniable now. Mark's voice rose, sharp. You can't live alone forever. The house needs work. You need supervision. It's not safe. I stared at him evenly. I've lived just fine. What's not safe is trusting people who see my age as weakness. Ava sobbed harder. Her shoulders shook violently. For a moment, I saw the little girl she once was. The girl who clung to me after nightmares. The girl who braided my hair at the kitchen table. But that girl was gone. And the woman in front of me had made her choices. Still, my voice softened. Ava, why? She looked up, eyes red and swollen. We just wanted security, she choked out. For us. For the future. Mark said it was normal. That people do this all the time. And I thought it would be easier if you didn't worry. I closed my eyes for a moment. There it was. Not just greed. Not just calculation. Fear. Immaturity. Pressure from a man who saw me as an inconvenience. But understanding the motive didn't erase the betrayal. When I opened my eyes, Mark was glaring at me, realizing, perhaps too late, that the game had shifted, that he was no longer in control of anything. Get out, I said quietly. Ava's breath hitched. Mom, you heard me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Quiet authority carries weight. Mark opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't let him. I know everything, I said. The forged signature, the planning, the assessments you downloaded, the notes you took. I have documentation of all of it. His mouth snapped shut. And if you push me, I added, I will take this to court. And I will win. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. Ava stood slowly. Her shoulders slumped like something inside her had broken. She wiped her tears with the sleeve of her sweater. Mom, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I didn't answer. Some moments are too big for words. They left without another sound. The door clicked softly behind them, and the house, my house, felt different. Not just quieter, not just emptier. It felt reclaimed. I stood there, breathing in the stillness. The space where they'd sat still held the heat of their bodies, their intentions, their unraveling. I let the silence settle. My knees trembled, not with weakness, but with adrenaline. The kind that follows a battle you never thought you'd have to fight. I walked to the couch, sat down, closed my eyes. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt free. I had held the line. I had spoken the truth. I had taken my life back. The storm had cracked open, and I was still standing. After they left, the house felt hollow. Not empty, just quiet in a way that echoed. Like the aftermath of a storm when the sky is still heavy and the ground hasn't absorbed the rain yet. I sat on the couch for a long time, maybe an hour, maybe more, letting my breath slow, letting the tremors fade from my hands. It's a strange thing, reclaiming control. You expect to feel victorious, triumphant. But what I felt first was tired. Bone deep tired. Not defeated, not broken, just exhausted from holding myself together for so long. There's a fatigue that comes from bracing against a threat you couldn't fully name until the moment it stood in front of you. But beneath that tiredness was something else, something steady and new. Safety, not the naive kind. Not the kind that comes from trusting others to protect you, but a safety I built myself. I made a cup of tea. Chamomile, because that's all I had left, and I wasn't ready to leave the house yet. The kettle whistled louder than usual, or maybe my nerves were still too raw. I stood there watching the steam rise and curl into nothing, grounding myself in something simple, something human. I sat at the table, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and let the heat seep into my skin. Slowly, my heartbeat found its rhythm again. The house creaked the way it always did, the pipes clicking as they cooled. My husband used to joke that the house talked more than either of us. Back then, the sound made me laugh. Now, it felt comforting, like it was reminding me I wasn't alone. Still, the silence pressed on me in a way I hadn't expected. Every small sound, the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of leaves outside, felt amplified. An absence sat in the room with me. Not of Ava, not of Mark. The absence of trust. Once broken, it doesn't regenerate easily. It takes its time, like bone knitting back together. Slow, painful, deliberate. I knew I had to call Marisol. I needed her to know what happened, to make sure everything was properly documented. But not yet. Not in the immediate aftermath. I needed a few hours to feel like a person again. When I finally stood from the table, my legs felt steady. The events of the morning replayed in my mind, but softer now, like a distant echo rather than an ongoing threat. I walked through the house room by room, not to check anything, just to remind myself it was mine. The hallway photos, the worn carpet, the chipped paint near the baseboards, they grounded me. In the living room, I straightened the cushions, moved the coffee table a few inches back into place. A ritual of reclaiming space. In the bedroom, I smoothed the quilt, fluffing the pillows the way I always did. The air still smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet in my dresser. Normal things, simple things, but they mattered. Eventually, I sat on the edge of the bed and dialed Marisol. She picked up immediately. Mrs. Reynolds. Her voice was steady, calm, exactly what I needed. I told her everything, every word exchanged, every reaction, every detail I could recall. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. You did exactly the right thing, she said. You stayed calm. You documented it. And you didn't allow them to get what they wanted. Her praise settled something inside me. She explained the next steps, her voice firm but reassuring. We would follow up with written confirmation revoking all permissions. We would send a cease and desist letter if needed. We would add a safety provision with the court to block any emergency guardianship attempts. Her confidence steadied me like a hand at my back. Before we hung up, she said, this was a turning point. You're on safe ground now. I didn't fully believe her yet, but I wanted to. The next few days passed quietly. Ava didn't call. Neither did Mark. Their silence wasn't peaceful. It was charged, like the air before lightning. But it gave me room to breathe. I tended the garden. I cooked small meals. I sat on the porch with my coffee and watched the world go by. I did everything slowly, intentionally, letting my life settle into its new shape. One morning, a week after the confrontation, Ava finally reached out. The message was brief. Just a single text. "Mom, can we talk?" I stayed at it for a long time. I didn't owe her a response. I didn't owe her forgiveness. But silence creates its own kind of tension, and I wasn't ready for things to stay suspended forever. So I texted back. "Not yet." She didn't reply. That was enough for now. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. I began to feel lighter. Not because the betrayal hurt any less. It didn't. But because I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't bracing for discovery. I wasn't living under the shadow of their plan. I began walking again in the mornings. Longer each day. I started volunteering at the community center twice a week instead of once, because I wanted to be around people who saw me not as a burden, not as a failing body, but as a person with presence, with worth. Some days I still woke up with that weight in my chest, the memory of Ava's face when I told them the truth. Some nights I lay awake wondering if I'd failed her somehow as a mother, if some crack in our history had led her to this crossroads. But regret is a heavy coat, and I began learning to take it off. One Saturday afternoon, while sorting old papers in the attic, I found a box filled with letters my husband had written me over the years. Notes, birthday cards, random scraps of paper with scribbled messages. I sat cross-legged on the floor, reading them one by one. His voice came back to me through every ink stroke, steady, warm, protective in the way only he could be. At the bottom of the box, I found a letter I barely remembered, written a few years before he died. In it, he said something I didn't fully understand at the time. If the world ever tries to make you smaller, don't shrink. Expand. I folded the letter against my chest and let myself cry. Not from grief this time, from strength. The next morning, I called Ava. She sounded surprised, hopeful, nervous. We agreed to meet in a public place, a small cafe near the park, neutral ground. When she arrived, she looked tired, not physically, emotionally. Her face was softer than I'd seen it in years. We sat across from each other in a quiet corner. She couldn't look at me at first. Finally, she said, "I didn't realize how wrong it all was until I saw your face that day." I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let her continue. "I thought I was protecting our future, mine and Mark's, and I convinced myself it was helping you too. But it wasn't. It was selfish, and I'm ashamed." Her voice cracked. I looked at her hands, tight fists on the table. "You broke my trust," I said gently. Her eyes filled with tears. "I know. I don't know when I'll be ready to trust you again." She nodded slowly. "I'll wait, however long it takes." We sat there for a while, not healed, not mended, but honest. When we parted, she hugged me carefully, as if I were fragile. But I wasn't. Not anymore. On the drive home, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't a door someone else can walk through. It's a door you open yourself when you're ready. And I wasn't ready, but I could see the door now. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, the house felt more like mine than it had in years. Every creak, every dusty corner, every patch of sunlight on the floor, it all felt like proof of survival. Life didn't snap back to normal. It reshaped itself. Slowly, deliberately. I began to find joy in small things again. Watering the herbs, finishing a crossword, talking with neighbors over the fence. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, I sat on the porch listening to the crickets. The air was warm, the kind of warm that settles into your bones and reminds you you're alive. I closed my eyes. No tension, no fear, just peace. A fragile peace, yes, but a real one. And for the first time since everything happened, I believed something I hadn't allowed myself to think. I still had a future, a real one, a future I would decide for myself. No one else. In the months that followed, my life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. Not the old rhythm, the one shaped around visits and assumptions and routines that kept the peace for the sake of family. This was a new rhythm. Quiet, intentional, mine. I didn't rush to repair what had broken. Some things heal slowly, and some things never return to the shape they once had. I accepted that. It wasn't bitterness, it was simply truth. Ava reached out from time to time. Short messages, gentle ones. Updates about work. Photos of the garden she started on her balcony. Little pieces of her life offered without expectation. I responded when I felt ready. Never forced. Never out of obligation. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't something you give all at once. It's something that grows the way roots do. Quietly, in darkness, until one day they hold more than you realized. And as months passed, a strange thing happened. I began to feel proud of myself. Not because I'd won, though people tend to frame stories like mine in wins and losses. No, I felt proud because I had stood up, even when standing meant shaking. I had spoken, even when my voice was thin. I had protected myself at an age when the world assumes you no longer can. Some days I still felt the ache of what happened. I'd catch myself remembering Ava's face, that mixture of desperation and guilt, and something inside me would tighten. But it loosened more easily than before. Healing had a way of softening the sharp edges. I started attending a weekly support group at the community center, not for dramatic confession or therapy, just a circle of people who'd lived enough life to understand how complicated family could be. We shared stories. We shared advice. We shared silence when silence was all we had. It reminded me that I wasn't alone. Not really, and neither were my fears. One afternoon, an older gentleman in the group told me, aging doesn't make us weaker. It just makes other people more confident they can get away with things. He wasn't wrong, but aging can also strip away the noise, leaving only what matters: clarity, boundaries, truth. My home felt different now, not because anything had changed physically, but because I had changed. The walls no longer held anxiety. The rooms no longer echoed with dread. Everything felt reclaimed. One day, while tending the roses near the porch, I realized something else. I no longer checked over my shoulder expecting a car to pull up unexpectedly. I no longer flinched at the sound of my phone ringing. I no longer lived in the shadow of what could be taken from me. Instead, I lived in the light of what I had kept. And there was so much I kept. My freedom, my dignity, my voice, my future. I didn't win back trust with Ava overnight, but I did give her space to grow, to understand, to try again in small ways. Sometimes she visited for tea, sitting carefully at the table like she was entering a sacred space. We talked about safe topics, weather, recipes, updates on neighbors. Nothing heavy yet. Those conversations would come later, when both of us were ready. And slowly, gently, a new version of our relationship began to form. Different from before. Not naive, not blind. Something honest, something watchful, something real. Mark didn't come anymore. That door didn't reopen. And I didn't try to force it. Some endings are necessary. Some endings protect more than they hurt. Ava seemed lighter without him. Or maybe she just seemed more herself. I didn't ask. She would tell me in her own time. But the day she hugged me before leaving, the kind of hug that carries apology and gratitude in equal measure, I knew we'd made it through the worst of it. Not untouched, but stronger at the broken places. And me, I started making plans again. Small ones at first. A weekend trip with friends. A new quilt project. Volunteering at the local school's reading program. Then bigger ones. A class at the community college. A garden expansion. A list of places I wanted to visit before my knees decided otherwise. Because life didn't end at 68. It didn't end at betrayal. It didn't end at fear. It shifted. It opened. It revealed itself again. And I stepped forward, not as someone who needed saving, but as someone who saved herself. I learned something powerful in all of this. Getting older doesn't diminish you. It just demands that you protect yourself in new ways. Love doesn't exempt anyone from crossing lines. Family doesn't guarantee loyalty. Blind trust isn't kindness, it's surrender. And I'm done surrendering. My story isn't a cautionary tale. It's a reminder. A reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sits quietly until the moment you need it most. And sometimes it surprises even you. If you're listening to this, if you're older, or care for someone older, or fear becoming invisible in your own life, I promise you this. You are not done. You are not powerless. You are not defined by anyone else's plans for you. Your life is still yours, and mine. I reclaimed it. Now it's time to share the last thing I want to say to you, wherever you are. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. And if you remember only one thing from everything I've said, let it be this. You're never too old to protect what's yours.